So this is a live stream. Does that mean it's like watching the legislature?
Yes, sir. Yes. So CTN is here recording it, so it's going to be on the CTN network, and then it's also.
live stream.
Oh,
Bit of an echo.
And Lucas, could you put the agenda in the chat?
not sure why we're getting that echo. Trying to figure.
I didn't hear an echo that last time.
Mark, are you on a phone or are you on a computer?
I think that actually might be Jim Markow. I think he said Mark was going to sign him in.
Yep, that was the plan. I didn't know if they were both on there.
He says on a computer logging into phone, onto a phone. I'm going to paste our agenda into the chat, Lucas, just so we don't do it. Oh, it's too long. Message is too long.
It's too long, so I'm trying to figure out how to send it the other way. I apologize.
I do have a link to a Google Doc that I was going to share.
Oh, that could work.
That I put a map of Long Island Sound's eelgrass distribution and just a place to take notes as we go.
So in the interest of everyone's time, we'll wait just a couple of more minutes, and then I'm just going to say a few comments and then leave you to it.
Sounds great.
You know what? With that being said, I could just start with my comments since they're not even on the agenda, but I just wanted to take the time to say thank you to all of you for agreeing to participate in this working group. This has been an idea, a bill that took a little while to get over the finish line, but here we are. And I'm glad to see that so many people with the expertise in this matter have agreed to participate. Particularly, I'm anxious to see what you recommend for Stratford Point, but that's besides the point. Eelgrass restoration is a great next step as Long Island Sound continues to, get healthier per the reports that we hear every year from groups that do this type of work. And we need to keep the pedal to the metal, as they say, to keep that momentum and trend going. I know there are many interesting participants and factors in this, so I'm glad that everyone is participating. And I look forward to hearing the report in February, and then we will, the legislature will take up the recommendations in the 2024 legislative session. I leave you in the good hands of our hopefully soon to be made official committee clerk, Lucas, and of course, someone who needs no introduction, our LCO, Brad, who makes everything run, believe it or not. He's the driving force in what we do, and very much appreciated. He'll be able to guide you as far as questions as to how the legislation reads and the like. So that's enough for me. Again, thank you everyone for participating, and I look forward to seeing and hearing the report. And again, have a good one. I took a look at the agenda, and it's going to be an active one. So best of luck, and we look forward to hearing the report in 2024. Thank you.
And thank you. So I will kick us off. I'm Jamie Vaudry. I am chairing this committee. Bill Lucy is also, I don't know if he wanted to be co-chair, but he definitely is a driving force in the agenda and kind of what we're talking about in this committee. I'd like us to go around and introduce ourselves briefly, just so that we know who's on the call here. As I said, Jamie Vaudry, I'm from the University of Connecticut. I'm in the Department of Marine Sciences, and I've been working in eelgrass research and restoration in Long Island Sound for about 15 years. I'm going to pass it over to Larry, and I think what we'll do is if you could try to pass it off to someone after you are done introducing yourself. We'll see if we can hit everyone. So I'll pass it over to Larry. Larry, you're muted, I think.
So I am. Yeah, Larry Dunn. I'm the chair of the Groton Conservation Commission, and I could see the sound from my home. So that's something. And we are working very hard on sustainability issues and the climate change that's hitting our town. I guess the current thing is our POCD is coming up, and even eelgrass as part of our conservation plan makes a lot of sense. But I will go on and pass it off to Bill Lucy.
All right, thanks, Larry. I'm Bill Lucy. I'm the Long Island Soundkeeper, which is part of Save the Sound regional environmental group in New York and Connecticut. And we became interested in this topic a number of years ago, actually prior to me being hired here. There was a planting in Clinton that didn't work out. But since then, we have been getting more involved and doing a lot of outreach and trying to drive a lot of recognition to the value of eelgrass and that ecosystem within the sound, and then also exploring ways to partner with aquaculture interests and eelgrass interests and conservation all wrapped into one. So that's what I hope to get out of this this group. And I will pass it to Don Murphy.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Don Murphy. I'm chairman of the Stonington Shellfish Commission. Have been chairman since 1990 or so. So I have a fair amount of experience running along the coast of Stonington and seeing the impressive variability of eelgrass populations along our coast. And I will pass it off to Mark Harrell. I saw him on the list. Maybe he's muted.
He's coming on.
So I'm Mark Harrell. I'm the operations manager for Mystic Oysters here at the Noank Aquaculture Cooperative in Noank, Connecticut. So a lot of our oyster beds are places where eelgrass grows. So we're pretty familiar with different areas that produce eelgrass and where it's truly been prolific. So we're a resource on the water. We're on the water every day, even through the winter. So we have anywhere from 7 to 8 employees at any one time during the year, and so we're out there harvesting oysters almost every day. So glad to be here. And I'll hand it off to Dave Carey.
Hello, David Carey. I'm with the Bureau of Aquaculture. So we appreciate being on the work group, as we have long believed that the shellfish aquaculture that occurs out in Groton and Stonington have been equally as important as the state's investment in the sewage treatment upgrades, and we think that's kind of overlooked in the current policy. that sort of pits eelgrass and aquaculture against each other. So we're hoping through all the various work groups that we can, create some new policy that works for both resources and generally, for the betterment of all of Long Island Sound. And I'll pass it off to Brad Pelson.
We might have missed Brad for the moment.
I am here.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, I didn't anticipate introducing myself. I'm the LCO attorney for the Environment Committee, as Representative Gresco indicated. So I'll be serving to provide any procedural guidance that you all may need in terms of conducting your work. Thank you. I'll pass it off to, is Senator Summers? I see Senator Summers on, I think.
Hi, good
Yes.
morning. I'm Senator Summers. I represent 8 towns along the Connecticut shore, southeastern Connecticut shoreline, from Groton, Stonington, then all the way up to Plainfield. This was one of my bills that I had put in for a couple of years. I'm glad to see it finally got over the finish line. I'm looking forward to serving on this committee. And I do believe and agree that shellfish and eelgrass can cohabitate in a very positive coexistence, and they shouldn't be pit one off the other. I'm happy to say I spent some time with the Soundkeeper this summer, and there is great eelgrass near where we live and along the shoreline. So looking forward to learning more and seeing what we can do to help restore eelgrass across our state.
Thanks. Let's go to Craig Tobias next.
Hi, I'm Craig Tobias. I'm a professor in the Marine Sciences Department with Jamie. Mostly marine chemistry and water quality issues is what I do from 9 to 5 every day. Jamie and I work on some projects, various eelgrass restorations, including co-occurrence of aquaculture and eelgrass. And I am also a member of the Groton Shellfish Commission.
All right, let's go to Zach Gordon.
Hey everybody, I'm Zach Gordon from Connecticut Sea Grant, and I also represent the NOAA Fisheries Milford Lab in Milford, Connecticut, that does a lot of aquaculture research. But I mainly work regionally with Sea Grant programs across the Northeast, and I've had experience learning about how other states are dealing with the interactions of aquaculture and eelgrass, and I will bring that knowledge to the group. Excited to be a part of it. I'll go to Tessa.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tessa Gedges. I'm with Connecticut Sea Grant. I'm an aquaculture extension educator, and I've been working with the Connecticut Aquaculture Permitting Work Group. It's local, state, and federal regulators who manage not only aquaculture, but eelgrass, and we've been grappling with this issue for many years, and also worked with Jamie in the past in different research projects. And I'll pass it on to Hillary.
Hi there, I'm Senator Lopes' aide. I'm here to report back to him on what you guys are working on.
All right, and Lucas, I think you're wrapping us up here.
Hi, my name is Lucas. I'm sure you all have received a number of emails from me. I'm just here to administer this working group and all the great work you guys are doing, and be a resource in any way I can. I would also like to note that all of our things, as you can see, will be recorded. They'll be posted. If you have to step out to leave the meeting, feel free to review the resources because they will be posted. And with that, I'll let you guys kick it off.
All right, thank you. So I did just paste in the link to the Google Doc that includes the agenda. You can also add notes or comments to that Google Doc if you want them captured as we move forward. I want to go over just a quick tech introduction and kind of how we can work together as a group here. Obviously, we're in the Zoom environment. You should be able to turn on the chat by moving your cursor around the middle of the screen, and options should show up. And if you look for the chat, the bubble, there will be a window that's opened that will let you chat within the group here during this meeting. That's where that link to that Google Doc is. And again, if you want to add thoughts or notes to that Google Doc, if you scroll down to the bottom of it, there's a place where you can add information. For example, I've already added in a picture of the eelgrass distribution in Connecticut, as it stands roughly today. I think that's it for the tech, unless I'm missing anything that others have to add to that. So our plan for today is to give just a brief overview. This is largely going to be me and Bill Lucy and Tessa Getchus, bringing the group up to speed on kind of the common resources that are available and the state of knowledge in Long Island Sound. We do want to keep that relatively short, but there's a bit to get into. And then we want to get into what we're going to be doing as a working group. And that's really looking at the legislation, hearing about, what do we want for an end product, basically? What do we want to get to by that February date when we're delivering a report to the legislature? So I'll start us off. I think all of you are aware that there are many benefits associated with eelgrass habitat. Eelgrass provides a nursery ground for many commercially and recreationally important fish and crabs. It is a foraging ground, so a place where many organisms go to eat, and provides that habitat and structure as refuge for a lot of organisms. But in addition to that, it has benefits that we don't see as easily. We can dive into an eelgrass bed and see who's living in that eelgrass bed, who's eating there. But it also helps mitigate climate impacts by sequestering carbon. So it actually pulls sediment from the water column, puts it down into the soils, and locks that carbon away. So it is a valuable resource as the state moves to reduce our carbon impact. It is a valuable resource as a carbon sink. And it does provide some wave attenuation. So as storms are coming in, the eelgrass will slow down the waves and has the potential to reduce shoreline erosion. We're all interested, I think I heard most people mention aquaculture. We're all interested in that interaction between eelgrass and oysters. As wild oysters themselves and eelgrass often coexist. And I think one of the challenges that we're facing here in Long Island Sound is, as Dave Carey mentioned, this policy that we have that gets at that puts eelgrass and oysters in conflict. They are competing in terms of the policy, but in reality, they coexist and they do well together. The big question is, what is the impact of aquaculture gear on eelgrass, and can we find a way to coexist? Can we move forward? And that's where Craig and Tessa have also been working on the science side of that. How do you quantify what the impacts are between these two very critical habitat forming species in Long Island Sound? So I wanted to mention that the distribution of eelgrass in Long Island Sound. I am going to share my screen here for a moment. Of course, I am not a Zoom user, so give me 2 seconds to figure this out. Let's see. There. I believe I should be sharing my screen. That's actually the restoration piece. This is the distribution of eelgrass in Long Island Sound. So just to orient you, this is the Thames River here.
I'm not sure that we
Jamie,
can.
it's not sharing yet.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
You probably have to get it off your desktop maybe or something.
I had to click one more button. There we go. Share. Now, are you seeing it?
Perfect.
Okay, let me adjust the color on my screen here. There we go. All right, so this is the distribution of eelgrass in Long Island Sound. Just to orient you, this is Fisher's Island Sound. We have the Mystic River in this area and the Thames River here. And eelgrass really is constrained to that easternmost portion of Long Island Sound. And there are some reasons for that. Largely, they're due to water quality and seed source. I think as I turn it over to Bill, he'll talk a little bit about restoration efforts. But this is our current distribution. We do have a plan to restore eelgrass, and there's so much text on this slide because this is copied directly from the Long Island Sound Studies Comprehensive Conservation and Management Plan. So currently we have 2,000 acres of eelgrass in Long Island Sound. The goal is to increase that to 4,000 acres. And again, it gets at that idea of increasing the extent of this habitat and doing that by improving water quality and upping our restoration efforts, hopefully. I do want to mention that how we got that, it was done, we got that target using a model looking at where eelgrass is most likely to occur. So we do have information about where we can restore eelgrass effectively and where we think it can be located in the Sound. I want to, so we have two videos that we're going to share. I'm going to share one, and then Bill can either share it or I can share it for him as he gets to talking. Let me pull it up here. Let me just make sure that I can. Well, let's see if the sound comes through. If it doesn't, I may have to stop sharing and reshare. So this is a video. It's a minute long, a minute and a half long, that kind of gets us into that underwater world of eelgrass and tells you just a little about the distribution of eelgrass in Long Island Sound.
Not hearing the sound, Jamie.
Okay. Ellen, yeah, I should have practiced with Zoom before we got on today. All right.
It's got closed captions, so.
All right, let me try sharing one more time and see if I get a sound option. Share sound, here we go. Are we good?
All good.
Restoration and conservation of eelgrass beds is very important and very critical right now. The goal of my research is to put together a map of our historical distribution of eelgrass. I'm looking through literature, looking through libraries of plant collections, and trying to pinpoint data of where eelgrass was and what year it's from. There's like more eelgrass right here, there's some over here. Eelgrass is important because it is habitat for a lot of important fish. It filtrates the waters, it is a carbon sink, and it also stabilizes our shorelines. Noank Harbor, Connecticut, and the bottom is eelgrass. I get really excited seeing like Connecticut names. I'm like, ah, yes, a data point for Connecticut. If we know where eelgrass had grown in the past, we know that we have a relatively high success rate of restoring eelgrass back to that same area. I feel like science is very much just everyone like playing a small part, but everyone's small part ends up being something big enough to make a change.
All right, so that was just a little overview of eelgrass in Long Island Sound. At this point, I'm going to turn this over to Bill Lucy, who will talk a little bit about the restoration efforts that are currently ongoing in Long Island Sound. Bill, would you like me to stop sharing and give you control, or what would you like to do here?
You can go because there's a number of versions of that video. So why don't you do there's like a 12-minute one. I see you got a 4-minute version. Let's stick with yours.
Okay.
I was going to share the bigger one, but let me get back in here.
And then
Okay.
you both should have control to share, I think. So I need you to pause.
Yeah.
Okay.
Would you like me to stop sharing, Bill, or do you want me to play the video for you? When it's time, I mean.
Yeah, go ahead and just play the video for me.
Okay. Do you want to start it
Actually,
now, or?
you could stop sharing right now if you want. I'll give a little background.
Perfect.
And I can do it. So yeah, like I mentioned before, we recently got involved in eelgrass, or re-involved as our organization, and that was based on a small experiment that was done by Cornell out of the Peconic. And there's a machinist that we work with. He's usually out in like New York City, bringing electricians up to the Times Square interactive signs. Kind of an interesting guy, but he has a passion for eelgrass. And so he came up with this idea to glue eelgrass seeds to clams and drop the clams in because of, everybody knows about the scallops. A lot of good scalloping is in eelgrass beds. Jamie was talking about the oysters and eelgrass beds. Clams also have that relationship with eelgrass beds. It's a symbiotic relationship. They like to occur together. The clams will, they'll bring in that, by bioturbation, they bring in that oxygenated water down in through their holes, down into the root zone. The feces from the shellfish can be nutrients for the roots of the eelgrass. There's a lot of back and forth play. So he took that idea, being a practical sort of fellow, and they dropped some seeds in the Peconic. And the Cornell Cooperative Research Group, they do a lot of restoration over in New York waters. Steve Schott, and they swam by it the next year, and there was a big clump of eelgrass growing where they had dropped these clams. So our president asked me to get involved, and so it's evolved from that point where we've gotten some funding. There's been some planting in Shinnecock Bay, the Great South Bay, Smithtown Bay, and we're looking at bringing this technique to Connecticut. But just as background, a couple of the plantings seem to have taken hold, and a couple have not. So this is a very tricky thing that we're talking about, bringing back eelgrass to its former abundance. And we're going to get into a little bit of that because it's going to inform the policy, I think. But one thing that has been mentioned by the EPA is even when we fail, we need to keep going. And even if some of these techniques don't work the first time, doesn't mean we just move on. So I'm looking at this as a long-term commitment, and our method is just one of several. And I can get into more details in the future. But before we play the video, it's just, I've been working with some local shellfish folks here in Connecticut, and bringing clams in creates a whole new element to this. What I like to tell them is that, if we fail on this one, at least you got your lease area stocked with some clams. So, we want to go in as a partnership here where it's not adversarial, where it's win-win, and we just want to make sure both sides of the issue, conservation and aquaculture, don't view themselves as sides anymore, but sort of that symbiotic relationship that the clams and the shellfish and the eelgrass have. So, I guess I could probably share it, Jamie, right? All right. So let me call it up first in the agenda. Right. Okay. Share screen.
Don't forget to click share sound.
Oh, yes, thank you for that. I think this is the right one. Can you see that?
Wide, there's 1 football field or 1 hectare of eelgrass lost every half hour. Growing eelgrass from seeds was something that's never really been done before in the world. I did come up with this method to glue these seeds to clams, knowing that clams bury themselves, and then I was able to build a machine to sow in a systematic way on the seafloor, a way to sow these seeds into the ground by using clams to grow in underwater meadow.
So what we do is we come in and we anchor up, and the divers go in, the divers drop down to the bottom, and they go through the eelgrass bed, and when they see a reproductive shoot, they pick it and it goes into a mesh bag. And then they bring all the eelgrass back up here, all the reproductive shoots with the seeds on them. They go into a cooler, and then one of the divers, Rob, will take these seeds to the Cornell Extension Lab, where they have tanks that are bubbling with seawater, and he'll put all the seeds in those tanks to preserve them. In the later fall, October, November, we're going to take hatchery clams and we're going to glue the seeds to those hatchery clams. And then we're going to take this boat over to Smithtown Bay, and we're going to put all these clams that are loaded with the eelgrass seeds in these chutes, and they're going to shoot off the back of the deck as the boat travels at a set speed to try and figure out how many clams can we plant per unit of time, and then how much acreage or what's the unit area we can plant in a unit of time at what density of clams.
This last planting we did was 10,000, and we did it in 20 minutes. And we did it over a 2-acre site. We were doing 400-foot runs. In the future, we could have hundreds of these machines, thousands of people helping, and we could turn the tide on the degradation and loss of eelgrass worldwide. And that would be a great achievement.
There's a lot of work left to do. The method's not entirely proven out yet. There's all kinds of environmental factors that we have to deal with, but we're going to seed that area and see if they take. And my understanding is the rule of thumb for a successful project is that if that bed that was planted is still established 3 years after the initial effort, and it's starting to reproduce its own seeds and maybe expanding on its own, then you can consider success. The new generation has come into management. They're investing in sustainable industries. So they're just changing to a more steady state. How can we live on the earth, make money, and not degrade the environment? This is going to take decades, and I'll be long dead before we reach what I would consider a sustainable, steady state on the Sound. But there's been a lot of strides in the right direction, and this eelgrass project is just one small cog in that overall vision.
Not a lot of people know what eelgrass is and why we need to restore it. There's only really one last great eelgrass meadow on the Sound, and that's at Fisher's Island. So a lot of people who live on the Long Island Sound might not have even seen eelgrass in their lifetime, especially younger people. If we had more funding and more resources and more public support for this eelgrass restoration project, we can really scale it up and increase the speed and accuracy and scope geographically of what we're trying to do, and hopefully work to plant more eelgrass meadows in the future.
All right. So sorry for the piano music. I hope that didn't put everybody to sleep this morning.
The dinosaurs, the
Oh, hold on a second.
It wasn't until 20 million years later that they appeared.
There we go. Sorry about that. YouTube likes to keep rolling. So yeah, that's the quick update on what we've been doing. I'll hand it back to you, Jamie.
All right, thank you. Well, I am going to turn around and hand it back to you in just a second, Bill. So be prepared. I'm sure we could go on and on, meaning Bill and I talking about eelgrass and restoration, but we'll cut it there. And you know, if ever anyone wants more information, we're both happy to talk for hours about it. So, but we won't do that today. So the other thing that I wanted to touch base on before we started really digging into what it is that we're doing here is a quick review of what else is going on around Long Island Sound. That includes New York, but also Rhode Island as our very close neighbor. Lucas has put a link in the chat to the environmental website, and there are resources there. There are some mapping resources, some links to things that are going on in other areas. So things that we will want to look at as we're thinking about where we would like to see Connecticut going in the future. You know, we want to look around and see what others are doing. So, so I'm going to turn this over to Bill in just a moment. And Bill, I hope you saw that in the agenda that I signed you up for giving us an overview of New York. I'll talk about a new regional effort, and then I'll turn it over to Tessa to talk a little bit about the aquaculture side of eelgrass restoration and research. All right, so over to you, Bill.
Sure. So there's a number of people interested in eelgrass around the Sound. And we have Connecticut College, we have UConn actively involved, and then on the York, and I'm sure there's a few others, but there is the folks like you saw in the video, which is Cornell Cooperative Extension, and they're the ones that are doing a lot of active restoration around, but there's also Stony Brook, Brad Peterson, who's doing a couple of interesting things. He's got a long-term restoration site. He has drone video monitoring. He's got some very sophisticated modeling efforts that he's been doing, a lot of it in the Peconic with temperature loggers and what's called light coefficient meters, meaning, you know, if you have a lot of nutrients and too many blooms, the light can't get down to the eelgrass, and that's an issue. So he has been monitoring the Peconic, and he estimated that eelgrass could be extirpated from that bay within a decade because the temperatures are moving up. He also has a new project going on, is my understanding, to something that Jamie was talking about, which was how much carbon do eelgrass beds in our region actually sequester. So he's looking at actual numbers of pounds of carbon put back into the geologic cycle, which could inform hopefully something in the future we've been exploring with blue carbon options, which is, you know, something that's brand new, not well developed, but could be, you know, a potential economic incentive for shell fishing groups. But I know that's a whole other ball of wax we'll talk about at a later meeting. They have had eelgrass survive in the East River. This is Cornell Cooperative Extension, just putting them up off the ground out of the zone which goes in Oxic, just to see. And there's an effort hopefully going on to look at different methods in Port Jeff this upcoming year. We're looking at doing replicant comparing methods, including ours on the Connecticut side with Connecticut College, potentially Project Oceanography, as well as Indian River Shellfish in Clinton. So there's a lot of efforts that are going on. Jamie's got some really interesting stuff utilizing iron additions to plantings of live rhizomes. Yeah, there's a lot going on, and it seems that people finally realize that we have a problem that's been, for example, New York finally just got their first, they got rehired the egret coordinator, and that position's been defunct since 2009. So I think there's a real recognition now that we need to be coordinating efforts across states to try and get at some solutions that will work. And so I think that might be a good point to hand it over to Jamie, because she's also very much involved through the NER in the local regional effort. So Jamie.
Yes, thank you, Bill. So I wanted to mention the Long Island Sound Studies Eelgrass Management and Restoration Strategy. This was a document that came out in December. It resulted from a fairly large working group of about 30 to 40 people who met several times last year to kind of identify the gaps in our understanding about eelgrass restoration, and the challenges. One of the challenges that was identified that, in a world without restrictions, we would take eelgrass from down south and move it into Long Island Sound. We would be testing out this idea of eelgrass that is more tolerant, moving it into the Sound so that we are better able to weather climate change. Of course, I said that's that magical world without any restrictions. In reality, that has a lot of challenges to it that we'll probably dig into at some point in time. So instead, the efforts, that's still something that we want to be thinking about and talking about and finding out if there are ways that we can share eelgrass along the Atlantic coast. But in the shorter term, in the 5 to 10 year time range, we're really looking at what can we do in Long Island Sound? What can we do with the eelgrass that we have in Long Island Sound in terms of determining which is the best to use as seed source or transplant stock for increasing these restoration efforts. So that document, I'm hoping we can get it shared on on our working group website. Lucas did share the working group website in the chat again. And I did add it to the Google Doc as well, that link. So hopefully we can get that strategy included on our environmental website, because what we want to do is avoid redoing what has already been done. So we would like to take information from that and expand on the pieces that are relevant to what we're doing as a working group, and kind of move the thinking forward on how we want to approach eelgrass restoration in Long Island Sound from a policy standpoint. The other thing that I wanted to mention is Bill brought up the NER, that is the Connecticut National Estuarine Research Reserve, NERR, which we call the NER, the reserve, the research reserve. So this was a NOAA funded program. We are the 30th reserve across the nation. I'm serving as the research coordinator for the reserve. And we do join this nationwide network of places where funding is dedicated by NOAA to support research, education, training, and stewardship. Our reserve encompasses about 50,000 acres of Long Island Sound and 2,000 acres of upland areas, which are Bluff Point State Park, Haley Farm State Park, and then 2 natural area preserves over on the Connecticut River. But that 50,000 acres of submerged area of Long Island Sound stretches from the Connecticut River to the mouth of the Mystic River, and encompasses a fair bit of Connecticut's eelgrass. And we did that on purpose because eelgrass is one of our focus areas at the reserve, restoring and understanding eelgrass. Craig had mentioned that he and I are working on a project, we have a proposed project to look at the interactions of eelgrass and aquaculture, and that all fits in with the mission of the reserve. So as part of the reserve, we were asked by the Long Island Sound Study to become the leaders of an eelgrass collaborative across the region. So this includes academics, managers, policymakers, interested citizens, practitioners from across Long Island Sound, but also outside of Long Island Sound. If any of you are interested in joining that collaborative, we have not yet started meeting. It actually starts probably this September, end of September will be our first meeting. But if you're interested, please email me and I will get you on the list for that Eelgrass collaborative. So, so again, I think that this working group can tap into that broader group of expertise if there are questions that we have or areas that we need more information. But it's also a two-way flow. So the hope on behalf of the Eelgrass Collaborative is that output from this working group will inform the direction of what that collaborative is considering. Now that Eelgrass Collaborative has a different mission, a different target. It's really looking at the advancing the science of restoration in eelgrass and moving forward our capacity to do restoration in a big way. So we have many challenges when it comes to restoration. First of all, can the plants even survive? You know, Bill kind of referenced this a little. It is like planting a plant in your garden. You can take care of it, you can water it, you can fertilize it, you can watch over it, but it still might die. Same thing when we're planting eelgrass underwater. It's just more difficult because we're not there looking at it every day and checking on it and making sure we're helping it along. So that's one challenge. But we also have these policy and regulatory challenges related to eelgrass and it coming into these areas which are already shellfish aquaculture leases. So that's another challenge. And then there's a third, even kind of larger fuzzy challenge, which is the science of restoration. Bill mentioned that, you know, we are always trying new ways of restoring. Craig and I have the sulfide project where we're trying to do some soil amendments. So literally trying to improve the soil as we're planting eelgrass. Bill's gluing seeds to clams in an effort to get it to root. And then there are the tried and true methods of restoration, which include literally taking adult plants and planting them, but then also spreading seeds and hoping that those seeds take. And there's a lot of research that goes into that and the need to build the capacity to do restoration on a large scale. In Long Island Sound, our restoration has largely been pilot projects for most of us, meaning that we're doing small beds, seeing if things will survive. Cornell Cooperative Extension is our go-to group for putting in larger restoration efforts, or putting in more plants in the ground or more seeds on the ground. But if we want to step up to the level of a place like Chesapeake Bay, which is very active in eelgrass restoration, that requires facilities. You need a place to store those seeds. You need a place to store the adult plants that you collect. And so that's what that Eelgrass Collaborative is also looking at, not just the science behind it, but also how do we build the infrastructure in our region to support eelgrass restoration moving forward. So those are again things that are going on with slightly overlapping missions that we just want to make sure that we are informing what they're doing, as well as hearing what they are doing as we're moving forward. All right, at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Tessa to tell us a bit about the aquaculture side.
Thanks, Jamie. I know we're all excited to be working in this space together. Today, you asked me to talk about the state's aquaculture permitting work group. So Sea Grant serves as the chair of this work group, and we have no regulatory authority. Basically, our role is to bring the state and federal agencies together to have conversations. It's comprised of Department of Agriculture, DEEP, the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and their role is reviewing aquaculture permits to understand the interactions, not only among aquaculture and human uses, but also protected species and habitats. So one of those habitats, of course, is eelgrass. And we as a work group have been concerned about this for many years. Back in the mid-2000s, there was a policy that was established that prevented any aquaculture and eelgrass interactions. So basically, No aquaculture, shellfish aquaculture specifically, could be happening in eelgrass beds. And there's actually a buffer that they can't be in and around those beds at all. So specifically, the agencies were looking at direct effects or potential impacts from aquaculture gear, such as cages. So any impacts to the eelgrass themselves from deploying or retrieving the gear, but then also indirect effects. So mainly shading from floating gear. But at the time, there wasn't that much aquaculture gear in Long Island Sound. It was primarily limited to Eastern Long Island Sound, where we have eelgrass, though. What we've seen since then, though, is that aquaculture is expanding very slowly compared to other states. But there is more gear in the water at the surface. There is some cage culture. Again, it's mainly in Eastern Long Island Sound, where we're also seeing the expansion of eelgrass in some areas. So although there's not a lot of interaction right now, there's the potential. And also with restoration, there's potential because 20% of Long Island Sound is covered with shellfish beds. So not necessarily gear, that's mostly bottom culture, but there will be interaction. So those agencies are really interested in understanding what the potential interaction is and how to address the current policies in place and management for the future. So one thing that they're looking at are what are the research gaps? What research has been done already that's relevant to Long Island Sound and the aquaculture practices that we have in play right now? And what sort of implications will it be for the future industry? So as it grows and the different types of gear that could be used in Long Island Sound. So the work group asked Julie Rose from the NOAA Fisheries Lab in Milford to conduct a literature review, and the plan was to identify data gaps based on that literature review and prioritize research, and then share that with the research community. So again, that they could make science-based decisions going forward. I think the agencies have come together and again, established that first policy in the mid-2000s as a precautionary policy. There wasn't much data to inform that decision, at least not much locally relevant data. As you know, Jamie, Jamie led a research project in Eastern Long Island Sound where we were looking at depuration cages. So these were cages that were placed on the bottom for 2 to 3 weeks at a time, so the shellfish could purge themselves of bacteria. And we did not see any significant differences among treatments that were outside in a control area without eelgrass. But still that policy was kept in place as a precautionary measure. Now we have gear that's been placed in areas where it's there for an entire season. So typically during the summertime when eelgrass is growing. So again, more potential. We've also seen eelgrass come back and repopulate areas where it hadn't been when those first permits for aquaculture gear were placed. And so that's a concern too. A concern for farmers, not necessarily a problem, but we don't have data to demonstrate that the aquaculture is the reason, or the oyster being in that gear is the reason that the eelgrass has come back. So the growers will all tell you that, and it could be true, but it's anecdotal. But we'd really like to understand those interactions better. So let me just pull up what Julie shared. So there was an aquaculture and eelgrass interaction meta-analysis conducted by Ferris and her colleagues in 2019. And what Julie did was to add studies that had been published subsequent to that study. She added additional information about shellfish and seagrass species. She provided more specific geographic information and provided information about within study factors, including site and treatment, and studies whether the effects were reported as neutral, negative, positive, or mixed, or a combination of the three. And so she broke this down into a table, and she has offered to share that at an upcoming meeting of ours. So I don't want to go into too much detail. We haven't had a chance to review it as a work group yet. We're going to do that next month. But I just wanted to share that as a resource because I think it will be really important, again, for us to identify data gaps and then research priorities for the future that the work group will not be able to address. We're really hoping that the research community can submit proposals to address this issue again, so that all this has implications for future management, not only for aquaculture, but eelgrass restoration. So thanks.
All right, thank you, Tessa. So at this point, we're moving into our group work. So setting up some priorities for this working group. I think we want to think about the required outputs or products from this group, review the mission statement, kind of set up a timeline for our meeting and see if we can find a day or time that might work. And lines of communication, and then member assignments if we have some homework to do before our next meeting. So Senator Summers, are you still with us right now, or did you have to step away? Perfect. Hello.
I'm here.
I wonder if you could perhaps just give us a little background on the bill, your motivation for proposing the bill, and what you're hoping to see from the working group.
Okay, I'll give you a Reader's Digest version because I'm between two different meetings. That's why I keep going back and forth. My motivation for the bill is I am always been an environmentalist. I worked closely with our shellfish folks. Hi, Mark, by the way. And I've seen personally the eelgrass that we had as children here along the shore just disappear. And we all know, we've heard from all of you, all the great things that eelgrass does and how important it is to the marine ecosystem. And we have to do something to bring it back. So my motivation is purely environmental, and also to make sure that we are not having our aquaculture folks like in conflict with what we want to do environmentally. I would like to see a plan, which I know is going to be difficult, and options for the legislature to undertake policy-wise to help the restoration of eelgrass along our waterways here, including costs that may be associated with it. So we could find areas to look to be able to fund research and actually fund the actual cultivation of eelgrass if that's possible. So that's what my motivation is. I know that there's other people in the legislature that are also, keenly interested in it. I think that we are trying and beginning to set an awareness of how critical eelgrass is for our marine life in general. And the Environment Committee is starting to recognize its importance. I also have worked closely for many years with some of our shellfish commissioners. My father happens to be one. So, I think for the last 40 years on the Shellfish Commission in Groton, I have learned more about eelgrass and oysters than probably anyone would ever want to know. And to, sort of bring that legacy forward, I think it's important. So that's that's my main reason and motivation to try to get this done. I'm really glad we finally got it across the finish line this year. And hopefully that out of the report that we will generate, it will provide opportunities for the Environment Committee or a legislator to put forward policies that may help in the advancement of the eelgrass restoration that we all are here to support. That's it.
All right, thank you. All right, so I might put Lucas on the spot here to find out if he knows. We do have a required output, I think, where the legislature is looking for a report from us in February. Do I have that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. Do you have anything more to say about that, or should I keep any other guidance for us?
If Brad has anything to add to that, I would definitely ask him. He would be the go-to on that.
Sure. Thank you, Lucas. So the legislation itself provides that the working group shall develop strategies for the preservation, restoration, and expansion of eelgrass along the state's shoreline. It indicates that in developing those strategies, the working group shall review and synthesize information from studies performed by the states of New York and Rhode Island, which I think have been referred to already. The legislation says, including but not limited to Tier 1 mapping in Long Island Sound and change analysis performed by the University of Rhode Island. And again, the deadline would be hopefully by February 1st of 2024 for the report that has to include explanations of any such strategies and identification of any priority areas of the shoreline for the implementation of such strategies. So that's essentially what the charge of the working group is. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Any questions or thoughts from the group on our charge thus far? Any concerns, any questions?
I have my hand up. I don't know if you can
Oh,
see
go
it.
right ahead. Yes, Heather.
Heather Summers. I just wanted to, and Brad can certainly weigh in here. It is not uncommon for legislation to have a due date for a report. And it is also not uncommon for groups like us to not be able to make that date based on how long it takes us to collect information. And it is not uncommon for groups like us to ask for an extension of that date. So I just wanted to make sure everybody knows that. We do that all the time in public health, because when we're writing legislation, we have to put a date in when the task force are supposed to get back to the legislature. I'm not saying that we shouldn't, try to push forward, because if we're able to collect that information, there's enough time to try to get a committee to raise whatever the concepts are we have in the next legislative session. But I just wanted to make sure everyone knew that. That's all.
Yeah, I would echo what Senator Summers has said. That said, there are practicalities of the effects from that in terms of if there's the ability to actually get something done next session for something that you might consider some of the low-hanging fruit. So I do encourage groups to at least issue the recommendations for the low-hanging fruit that they think the legislature could act on, maybe for next session, in the sense that next session is a short session, it's very quick, things get going quickly. And I know Representative Gresco indicated his desire to get some stuff done from this group for next session if possible. So that is a consideration for next session, given that it's a short session and there might be some smaller things, so to speak, that maybe could be done for the upcoming legislative session. Thanks.
Right, thank you. So I have been debating, going back and forth on how we want to work as a group. I'm going to throw out a few options, and then I'd like to hear from you all as to how you want to interact in the Zoom interface. There are a few options. We can just do comments in the chat and speaking up on Zoom as we run through this. We could, that's option one. Option two is using the Google Doc as a place where people can add ideas, thoughts, or explanations. And the third option is an online, think of it as like an online whiteboard where you can put notes up on the board. I tend to use a program called Mural, but others may have used Jamboard, or there are a bunch of other options out there. But the idea being that you can go to this kind of shared environment and add ideas, move things around. Mural and the Google Doc have the benefit of being able to paste in links to websites or images or links to documents if you need to. So thoughts on how we want to move forward. And I guess before I throw that open, I think what I'd like to come out of today with is an outline of what we need to do, and possibly some people stepping up and saying, I will do this section of this report. I will look into this and report back. So the idea is that we'll go look at the documents that we need to look at, our charge from the bill to review what other states have done and summarize it. You would have an opportunity to present back to the group at our next meeting. And then we would iterate, we would make our next plan of action, working towards developing that report. I will say that I do not envision this being, an in-depth scholarly level of review. I think a lot of the information is there, and it just requires someone to go look at it, pull it together, and present it to the group here. So I view this more as like a division of labor versus if we break it up into small pieces, then we're all doing a little bit before our next meeting and not, 20 hours of work in preparation for the next meeting. That's what I'm avoiding, the 20 hours of work before our next meeting. So thoughts on, how you like to interact in Zoom, how we want to move forward. Please raise your hand and I can call on you, or if there's a dead spot in the conversation here, feel free to speak up. Craig, go ahead.
Yeah, I think maybe this is just a personal preference, but I really do sort of the contemporaneous exchange of a dialogue. But I also like having a Google Doc that exists that can be added to and amended later, because personally, it takes me a while sometimes to synthesize what everyone has contributed to a discussion into, well, quite frankly, something that's actually cogent and comprehensible. So that would be my suggestion or preference.
Other thoughts?
One component of this, and Mark, thanks for standing in today. I know there was another meeting at City Hall dealing with some water quality stuff. But there was also some technical challenges there, and dealing with other shellfish growers, a lot of them still have flip phones and maybe not doing Google Doc stuff. So I'd be really interested to hear the best way to kind of synthesize that side of things, the thoughts from you guys.
I mean, on our side of things, I mean, we're out on the water most of the time. I mean, even just to take an hour in the middle of the day is tough. So, having a document that we can go back and add stuff, that something we can, Jim and I can sit around at night and look at, can help. I'm a little more friendly when it comes to electronics than some of the older guys in my industry. So, we can manage some pretty good, we can manage something electronically. And also too, since we are running around all the time, I mean, we can even have meetings here, I mean, we're the kind of guys that will just kind of sit around and have a discussion, and we can take notes, and however that needs to work. We do things in a pretty practical manner. So, we're fine with having coffee and sitting around and talking.
Yeah, that's good. I think it would be good to consider some in-person meetings. I know, Jamie, I emailed you about that. Let's see.
I definitely prefer them. So they are often easier, harder to travel to, but yeah. Larry, I think you had something to add.
Yeah, I don't think it's an either or. I think each of the mechanisms you've mentioned has a place. You have to have a repository for the information. So Google Docs is as good as any, to put things. Now, how you develop that material, whether it's in person meetings or, using a Zoom with a whiteboard, to me, those kind of feed it. So I think it more as a hierarchy rather than a either or.
Great. All right.
Larry, just so Jamie mentioned there's a lot of information like Connecticut Shellfish Restoration Plan, or the EPA, the Long Island Sound Study Eelgrass Restoration Plan. Those are that's some of the information that already exists. But so what you're saying, Larry, is maybe there's like a shared space where all that stuff is in one-stop shopping, but then maybe a mural or a Jamboard or a Google Doc so people can put their their top level thoughts on it? Is that what you're, as far as hierarchy?
Not quite, but close, is that the repository is where any developed material would go, so we can go back and look at it, which to me is one of the powers of Google Docs. But now how do you create that material? That's what I'm talking about. And, so you do it depending on the topic. One of the things that I haven't heard yet, are we going to talk about the cost benefit of any of these policies or suggestions? Because at the end of the day, the legislature is going to vote and spend money. And what do I get for that money, right? One would like to see is, yes, we're going to improve the agriculture business and actually generate revenue, and we're going to improve the environment because of the increased carbon sequestration of the eelgrass. So that part of it, I'm not sure how to address that, the economic balance between the suggestions and the end impact. Is that part of this group?
I think it is a desired output of this group. Yeah, I think we need to address it in some way. There is some information that estimates the cost of restoration and estimates the likelihood that you'll have success with that restoration. The benefits analysis is a little harder to get at, but I think, again, we probably have some sources. So there's information out there, but in the end, it's all kind of squishy. It's all, well, if you think of this and you think of that, and there's a lot of caveats with those estimates. But as with all science and policy, science is always evolving and changing, and our understanding of, the economic benefits of eelgrass will always be evolving. We need to make a call. And so I think our charge is, as a working group, to take what is out there and make our best judgment for what is realistic and what is our best call right now in terms of that cost benefit analysis. So I do think it needs to be part of our report. And all we can say is the information is not going to be perfect, but it will be our best understanding at this point in time. Yeah, that's how I understand it. Tessa and then Craig.
Thanks, Jamie. So I was wondering, someone already mentioned that if we start with what we know and what we don't know and what the resources are in the policy, research, maybe outreach and restoration realms, we could start with that in groups and put that down on paper. And then maybe a second step would be to follow up with interviews with different communities. So I'm thinking industry managers, researchers, and restoration practitioners, and ask them about so this is what we know, what we don't know, what are the implications for these different communities. So, maybe that's where we can get out to Mark, to Jim, and others in industry, and also, again, those managers, and look at the near term and the longer term.
That's great. And I could not even begin to type fast enough. So, Tessa, I'm going to ask if you can, if you are able to, if you could go to the Google Doc at the very end of it. I was starting to try and outline the topics that we want to cover. So for anyone else who's in the Google Doc, please go to the end. And if they're, help me capture some of these thoughts, either your own or other people's.
Jamie, can I mention just one last thing that I forgot? The aquaculture work group developed a tool called the Aquaculture Mapping Atlas, and I failed to mention that. It's a great tool where we have lots of different types of spatial data, but among them are where all the aquaculture gear areas are in Long Island Sound, but also commercial, recreational, and natural shellfish beds and eelgrass beds. So you can overlay that data. And we have the eelgrass beds from, I think, all the years it was collected, but not your newest data, Jamie. So we could bring that in as well. And I'll put the link in the Google Doc. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you. Over to Craig.
Yeah, thanks. Tessa, those were really great comments on sort of some practical next steps. But I wanted to comment on something that Larry had said, which was, I think his comment speaks to a bigger picture. I think it's beyond the charge of this work group to do a full-blown, environmental economics type analysis. But Larry's comment speaks to a question that I always get when I get into similar kinds of working groups, which is, what I think we have to define what does success look like, and what is the reasonable timeline for achieving whatever goals we think are appropriate. Because I think if the state is going to make investments in this, sort of having an understanding of a reasonable gauging of expectations, I think is important. And it's one of the lessons that I've learned, being part of all the Western Long Island Sound hypoxia work. So I think, Tessa contributes the practical next steps. I don't really have anything practical to say, but I'm just suggesting, keeping this bigger picture in mind in terms of what does success look like, and how long do we think it would take to actually get there?
All right, thank you. Tessa, was your hand up from before, or was that a new hand? Okay, on to Bill.
Yeah, and I think there's one other research component. I'm not quite sure who is best suited to do it, and it may already have been done through the group that Tessa was discussing earlier. Looking at all the eelgrass laws from different states to see if there's different policies and different ways that recreational boating or various fisheries or aquaculture, if there's restrictions or not, and how are they addressed by different states as maybe a guideline for options, what we could consider here as policy in Connecticut.
I'll mention that I may have a line to help us do that relatively quickly through the reserve system. So by polling the reserve system, we can get a quick snapshot of these challenges in other states around the nation without having to go to every website ourselves and look at it. So
Is that you volunteering for that?
I am volunteering to do that.
Thanks, Jamie.
Yeah. All right. So with the Google Doc, I think I will share my screen because I'd like to get, we have about 40 minutes left here, and it is okay if we end a little early. I want to save 15 or 20 minutes at the end just to make sure we have enough time to figure out how we want to move forward in these discussions. So kind of the timing, how often we want to meet, and what we might hope to accomplish between meetings. So really that gives us maybe 15 or 20 minutes right now. And what I'd like to do is share my screen and kind of get an outline of what we think are important in this report. It'll probably be a little messy at the end of the day here, but we can clean it up before our next meeting so that we have a goal to work for, a concrete goal to work towards. So I am going to rearrange my screen here. Give me 2 seconds and share. All right. So this is in the Google Doc. Again, if you want to go directly to the Google Doc and enter your own thoughts here, please do so. But one of the things that I kind of managed to capture was we want to review that existing information, both the mapping efforts from neighboring states, the change analysis, and the policies. So the policies among our neighboring states and probably nationally as well. What else do we need to do here as a group? And I did put the language for the bill up here.
Zach, one other thing I think been discussed already, but to add there is to review existing research and what data gaps there might be.
Yeah, I was thrilled that Senator Summers is thinking about, funding in the future for supporting restoration and research in the future. So I think something else that I would also add is, maybe as a separate comment, is that infrastructure idea. Like, how do we support restoration operationally? How do we achieve that? And I think, as with a lot of things, it's probably a combination of researchers, aquaculture practitioners, restoration specialists. I think that there's probably a combination of people that are required to kind of up this restoration effort. So how do we want to reflect what I've already forgotten who was talking about it? Was it Larry? Yeah, Larry, who was talking about that cost benefit analysis. Anything that we want to add under that category? And Craig, I did hear you coming in. So feel free to change the topic. We can come back to this one.
Oh no, sorry. I was just going to suggest that the language in the bill sort of provides at least some self-organization for what we produce. Preservation, restoration, and expansion of eelgrass seem like, section headers to me that, we can put some of these other topics within. And that just ensures that the document directly address what our charge is.
Under cost benefit, I think you got the qualitative and the quantitative. As you mentioned, we may not be able to be really accurate on a quantitative, but we certainly should be able to do the qualitative part of that.
The cost benefit analysis can be part of your explanation of why you are prioritizing one or more strategies over another strategy. So that, I think that logically kind of pans out in terms of what the requirement is for the report.
Yeah, and site priorities as well, I suspect.
Craig, you had mentioned preservation, restoration, and expansion. Did I get those three right? I feel like I didn't get them quite right.
I think so. They are part of the language of the bill.
Yeah, I don't have the full bill here.
Preservation, restoration, and
that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
Expansion.
Without, starting to, because you can just look at these and start seeing thinking of all kinds of subheaders for this. But I do think it's worth having one section on blue carbon, like current information to date under the cost benefit potentially, or up there, either way.
I think it goes under both. It may be a running theme. Like we introduced the concept of blue carbon in reviewing other existing information, but also touch on it in the cost benefit analysis. So don't think of this outline as like the actual outline in the end, but let's think of it more as like a loose, let's put all the ideas out there and then clean it up later. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of an one of many ecosystem services.
Yeah.
Jamie, I don't see that you've given us editing permission, and Lucas had mentioned that in the chat.
Oh. Let me try. I thought nope. Yep. I gave you guys all the opportunity to view. I am just going to copy that link in case it created a new link and share it in the chat again. But I think it should have updated. You should now have editing. Oh, did I do it right?
That worked for me. I didn't
okay,
need
perfect.
to use the new link. I just refreshed my page and now I can edit.
Excellent. Thank you. So, are we missing anything here?
Use conflicts and
Oh, of
recommended
course.
resolution. That seems like a big one that it fell through the cracks.
What did Tessa? I think you had a different word than conflicts. Was it use challenges? Or
we're talking about interactions.
Yeah.
With
Yes,
human
that's
uses,
more
human
positive.
uses, protected species and habitats.
I'm going to write use conflicts for right now, but I think Tessa and I had a conversation where using that term conflicts implies that there is a conflict, and I don't know that it's a conflict as it so much as a challenge or an opportunity, something that needs to be addressed versus a true conflict is so. Coming up with a different term there. I still don't think we've settled on quite the right term, but something that gets at those challenges of competing uses. So are there other things that we feel are, at this time important to touch on in our recommendations?
Jamie, if I could talk about what I've been thinking a little bit about the big picture. What Brad is saying is that the legislature is interested in setting policies for the preservation and expansion. And he also mentioned that it would be good if we had some results that we could give to them in that February timeframe, and therefore we should be thinking about trying to identify low-hanging fruit that could show some progress towards where we're going here. And I think most likely that would probably be in the area of preservation, but that's just sort of a guess. So I'm just wanted to make sure that we are thinking about opportunities for moving things along. February is soon. We're almost in September, and I'm kind of picturing out what happens through the next few months, including a long holiday period, and I'm a little bit worried about the timing of the whole thing and putting it all together. And I would like to kind of move the focus a little bit towards what's available for low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, I would just add, a good sort of overlay for considering your recommendations and everything you're synthesizing is to consider what is a possible legislative endeavor, what is a possible DOAG endeavor, what's a possible deep endeavor in terms of, all of your strategies may not necessarily encompass legislation itself. Obviously, when it comes to funding and certain things, that is legislative in nature. But you may also have recommendations under existing authorities that the agencies have. And so that's another overlay to be cognizant of in terms of how you're developing and what can or cannot be done. And of course, the legislature can play a role in fostering those agency solutions also. So that's something to keep in mind in terms of being productive and coming up with something. You definitely, I think, want to be able to show that you've produced something, even if you do find it necessary to ask for an extension or a renewal of the group itself, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It may be that it's a kind of an evolution of the group and what you're looking at and putting forth and producing. But I think generally it's appreciated when the group itself does what the charge is and produces something before just asking for an extension in and of itself, is what I would suggest.
Thank you, Brad. And I agree. It's good. And it's good to have that reminder to keep us on target here. And I think that really is what we want to develop in the end. So we need to be streamlined and focused. Absolutely. Bill.
Yeah, so along those, there's a question, I guess, for Brad. With my experience up there, you have policies are one thing, kind of like passing this working group. There was no fiscal note to it. So it should have passed the first year, but it took 2 years. Then there's also, like in the case, let's say, of infrastructure, like, hey, we need places for seeds. Let's put in a budget for UConn to fund more tanks or something along those lines. That I could see, running into a budget year, which is not next year. It's a biannual budget. And maybe that is something that just is an in-house through an agency or something along those lines. But I guess my question then, Brad, is, has it been typical practice in the past to have a bill or a handful of bills drafted by these committees, preset and agreed upon by this group, that then get put through the process?
Well, that's kind of a complicated response. But it's very typical that the Committee of Cognizance, meaning the Environment Committee, would in fact raise a bill concerning the recommendations of the group in order to continue the progress of the group, in order to try and implement some of those ideas. And in terms of, I'm sure you're aware, in terms of the likelihood of that occurring and all the certain factors that can come in, the political factors that can come in, and in terms of that actually getting done, well, that's largely unforeseen in some instances. So things can stall things that you never really thought would play a role in getting something done on a topic. Yeah, it's typical that their ideas for bills. Usually what happens, though, in terms of the actual legislation and what that would look like, that's usually crafted and agreed upon once the committee, meaning the Environment Committee, comes back basically in February and starts talking with, the chairs and the ranking members. And there's always more input at that point in time in terms of what the recommendation and what that legislation would actually look like. So it's not, while it can be on the topics that you guys recommend, and it may generally implement your overall strategy, it may look, quite different from what your recommendation in and of itself is. It usually takes on more facets, to tell you the truth. And so don't be surprised about that, which I think all of you all are probably sophisticated users in terms of the legislature. So you're probably aware that that occurs. And so, yeah, it's legislation rarely goes unchanged throughout the process, even if it starts at a certain point or whatever. So So yeah, it may be agreed upon in some sense, but it's really not until the committee screens it and thinks about it and all the voices get heard from the committee members, especially the leadership on the committee, that any sort of legislation sort of begins to grow in terms of what that's going to look like. I hope that helps in some ways.
No, it's good. It's just a good reminder that, you know, this is one step in the process. And the next step is somewhat out of our hands.
So, just to review what we have so far here, what we're thinking of for this report is that we will review the existing information from states, nationally, from our Long Island Sound region. We will consider that cost benefit analysis for identifying priority areas for restoration research efforts associated to support restoration. As part of that, we need to consider the infrastructure for restoration. So I'm going to perhaps move that down. All of this, we're looking to lead into policy suggestions. We want to touch on the areas of preservation, restoration, and expansion of eelgrass, especially looking for what we're calling the low-hanging fruit here, so things which can be accomplished easily in the near term, but then also I think considering, you know, bigger asks. So here's something small and immediate that we can accomplish that will advance this effort, possibly some longer range legislative hurdles that need to be approached, or policy hurdles that need to be dealt with that are not going to be handled before February, but perhaps need to be addressed to encourage restoration. And summarizing that, I feel like, yeah, so review of existing research data gaps are up above. And then those identifying from those policy suggestions, what are the possible endeavors? So what are realistic? What can or cannot be done? Are we missing anything, any big topics that we feel like we should put in place here? I feel like we've got the main points. Not exactly in the order I might put them in our final report, but definitely the main points.
I would also, and you know, I see Senator Summers, so I want to allow her opportunity to opine on this too. Is, you know, legislation is one thing, but also hopefully be cognizant of what authorities the two agencies may already have in terms of, you know, any solutions that you see that can already fit within the authorities that the agencies already have, whether it's through the regulation making process or through just adoption of a policy that sometimes doesn't go through the regulation making process. Those are things, important things to consider also as you're going forth, because everything doesn't necessarily have to be legislation. And sometimes, depending on where you're sitting on the issue, sometimes it's better if it's not legislation, but I'll let others speak to that a little bit more, but that's also something to sort of be cognizant of, I would say.
I would agree with that. I will tell you, as you probably know, Brad, I've had better success on, well, I shouldn't say better success, equal success on bills that I wanted to have passed, let's say for our commercial fishermen, that I worked with DEEP to have them update the regs rather than trying to put it through as a bill. Because then certain people that don't like commercial fishing at all will just come out. So I think that's a really important message, that we may find things that we could work with, whether it's DABA or DEEP, to have them upgrade certain regulations to implement something that we're interested in. and get them on board or get them behind the legislation. That's also helpful. Sometimes I'm sure you remember my farm issue this past session, getting that included in the agency bill is very helpful also. So, and you really need to have a champion behind whatever it is that you're doing to be able to expedite it, you know, try to get the chairs on board, stick with it the entire time, talk to their colleagues and all that, you know, we can obviously all help with that, but those are all things that help whatever it is we end up with as recommendations or bill ideas or upgrade regulations ideas to try to, you know, continue this conversation in a positive way. So I agree with all that you've said.
Thank you. Tessa, go ahead.
Jamie, can we include a section on public outreach and engagement? I think that's really important. And I was, you know, thinking about what Senator Summers said about, you know, growing up with eelgrass and seeing it, and, you know, that's what makes you care about it, seeing the importance of it. But many, you know, families and youth have not been exposed to it. And so how will we engage them, get them to care, and get communities to invest? I think, you know, having that sort of information is important, as well as having this report, which is to a different audience.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And in fact, I think that might come under, I think policy suggestions is probably too limiting, policy/regulatory/funding. I feel like that supporting that outreach probably comes under this, our suggestions. Do you think we need a review of it, or is it enough to put it as a section in the report?
I don't really know what's happening. I mean, I hadn't seen both of those videos. I think they're excellent, and there might be a lot going on that we're unaware of. So maybe there's two purposes. One, just internally for this group to understand what's happening, but then, you know, maybe the report just says, this is what we need to do. These are the target communities. I mean, obviously we're not going to reach everyone, but, you know, with limited funding, who do we get out to, you know? And again, I think thinking about the investments that need to be made in restoration. So where is our outreach best targeted in order to get those investments in restoration of eelgrass, and also legislative or policy changes? So outreach to those communities too.
Okay. Yes, I added it. I don't know that it's the right spot, but at least we've captured it. Bill.
I'm really glad you brought that up, Tessa, because whether you're going through the legislature and all of a sudden concerns that you didn't realize pop up and scuttle you for that session, or through the regulatory process. I mean, just was it last year when the new whelk regulations were coming in, you know, there was a legitimate complaint raised 3 weeks before the regulatory board after 8 months of open, you know, where there was ability for some affected people to comment, and there had to be a lot of like scrambling at the last second. But we had some good problem solvers there between Deep Fisheries and one of the chairs, Senator Minor, was pretty good problem solver on that. But if you can get the outreach done ahead of time, like Tessa discussing, it can make both those processes go smoother. I guess, you know, there's two ways to do that. We're not really charged with outreach, so this would be more of, you know, we would be asking for resources to back whatever structure the outreach, whatever the audiences we're going for. So even though we may not be able to use, I mean, I don't know, is that something that the group would consider, is outreach of these meetings for the low hanging fruit, or is it just part of the plan saying we need to do outreach? If that's clear enough. Do we do any now is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think there are two angles here. One is, you know, the recommendation that outreach has to be part of a plan moving forward, because you can't do this in a vacuum. You need legislatures, policymakers, managers, and the general public to understand why it's important. And so that requires an outreach campaign, which generally needs some funding behind it, you know, to support the people that are doing that outreach. So that's one aspect. But then the other aspect, Bill, I think is what you were just mentioning, that, you know, if do we need to do outreach as a committee? Is there any explanation, any presentations, any discussions that we can have to help support this idea among DEEP, DABA, and the legislator, the legislative body, you know, what might need to be done there? So I see two sides. I don't have an answer whether yes or no, but they're two different things, I think. Yeah.
On the latter part, if I may offer, it sort of sounds like what you're saying is in terms of your process, in terms of the working group's process for coming up with its recommendations, in the sense of gathering its information and its data, which a lot of it you can probably already do on your own, but gathering input. And the question then becomes, in terms of your process, whether it's, I'm not going to say open or closed, but open in the sense that you provide an opportunity for public input, in the sense of, say, whether it's an informational hearing or a public hearing in conducting your work. And so obviously the legislation itself is silent on that in terms of how you conduct your work, so to speak, in terms of the actual process. It does not require a public hearing. So that's not a requirement. I guess it's something you could consider as to whether or not you want a public hearing. And if you did have a public hearing, where that public hearing would be held. I would, I guess, in some ways caution on that, in the sense that there are a lot of logistics that go into holding a public hearing, whether it's in Hartford or whether it's at another location, you know, say hypothetically in the southeast part of the state or something like that. So that's, you know, it's something to consider, but there are a lot of logistics behind that, and you have to consider how that works into your overall time frame, in terms of, I guess, what you're probably going to get to is in terms of how often do we want to meet and things of that nature. So that's perhaps on that latter piece, a consideration for you as to whether or not you want something like that. The other thing is, you know, sometimes what groups do is they have more of a informational hearing, and that differs from an outright public hearing, in the sense that an informational hearing is by invitation of the group, meaning if there are folks or agencies or entities that you think you want to hear from because you believe that they have valuable information, or you want to hear their voice or something like that, you actually invite them to a hearing, and it's only those folks that you've invited that speak at that hearing. And sometimes that can be kind of a hybrid, if you will, of you know, having a little bit more control over the process, having a little bit more limited, but also more targeted in terms of the voices that you're hearing from. So those are some suggestions. I'm certainly not, I don't want it to be thought that I'm advocating for that, but it sounds like maybe that could be a component of this, if that was the desire of the group.
We don't have to decide that today, but any thoughts on whether that's something we want to consider? Because I think, as Brad just mentioned, there are certainly logistics with both a public hearing or just a public presentation or the informational hearing. So what are we feeling on any thoughts on those? Like, yes, we must do it, or no, I think that's a terrible idea. And then obviously folks in the middle.
Well, I think a formal hearing is probably more than we want to tackle. An informational hearing might be worthwhile. I guess it depends on what we actually come up with. So I'd leave it as a future decision point.
Yeah, I think you know, both options have merits. Given our timeline, I don't think how we could do really legitimate public engagement. But I think the informational hearing would, if we identified relatively soon that we don't have the relevant players or expertise on the working group, you know, to make, you know, legitimate recommendations by February, then I think we should consider an informational hearing. But we'd have to decide that probably by the next meeting, is
Yeah.
my guess. You know, and perhaps if we got an extension, you know, I almost view this as kind of like phase one, let's get some things out the door by February. And then phase two, if we ask for an extension, you know, taking the public's temperature on some of this, I think is useful, if not educational for us. Because if we are looking at this as, you know, a decades-long effort, you know, we have to have buy-in from constituents who are not eelgrass cheerleaders. And, you know, I'm kind of operating in the dark on that.
I agree. Other thoughts that we want to capture at this time? I do want to move us along as we're minutes slip by and I didn't notice, so we have 10 minutes left here. We need to talk about both our meeting schedule and what people are willing to tackle here. So we had talked about kind of a split in duties. If there is something that you would like to look into here on this list, I'm going to ask that we put some names associated with it. I'd also like to put forward an idea for our next meeting. I think at our next meeting, we might invite Julie Rose from the NOAA Milford Lab. Tessa has been adding some comments into our Google Doc, kind of on some resources that are available. I think Julie's recent literature survey and meta-analysis could really move us forward very quickly in our understanding of eelgrass and aquaculture interactions. I also think perhaps our next meeting, we try and cover kind of a review of the existing information. That be the topic of our next meeting. Moving that cost, you know, and then moving cost benefit analysis ideas and then the policy recommendations into our next meetings following, you know, meetings 3, 4, and 5, for example. Any dissension, any thoughts that we should do this a different way for our next meeting at least? I'm not seeing any hands. I'm seeing nope, no, I'm seeing shakes of no. All sounds good.
I would just suggest if Julie's going to be presenting that stuff, a lot of that's going to be really relevant, I think, to some of the industry interests. And I don't know if do we advertise these meetings, you know, so people, or do we just share a recording? How is the public viewing these meetings?
That's a good question. Lucas or Brad, how does that work here?
Well, and so that's really kind of the road that you're going down. Is it sounds to me like if you're going to have sort of an invited guest, that's almost akin to an informational hearing, because you're saying, okay, the group is going to hear from this individual, and now we're saying, okay, well, if we're going to hear from this individual, then we should be hearing from these other individuals. And so that, it's not to say you shouldn't be doing that. It's just to say, what is the sort of the best practice for doing that? And usually it would be through an informational hearing based on the little bit that I'm hearing from you guys thus far, in the sense of, we want to hear from some people and we kind of know who they are right now, but how do we acquire that information? And usually that would be through at least an informational hearing, to be kind of equitable to folks. And that's something for you guys to decide whether you want to do that or not.
So is the expectation for an informational hearing that we would invite other people to also speak? Or is it okay to have just Julie Rose come and give her summary that she put together for the aquaculture working group?
Well, I think it depends on what exactly is being presented. You know, if there's a so to speak another side to it, if you will, and it's not just pure kind of data driven kind of a thing, then I think, you know, probably the best practice would be to invite the other side. If it's just a presentation of data, pure empirical data, then you know, that might be a little bit different.
Yeah, Jamie, it sounds like it's a review of existing published literature. Is that what Jamie said? She added to the Ferris paper. We, you know, I think the composition of the working group, we've got industry members on here. I'm not suggesting that we exclude people, but I mean, maybe, you know, Mark, do you feel comfortable as kind of representing, you know, industry perspectives?
Yeah, I mean, the industry is, I mean, obviously every, you know, industry member in our world does things differently. There's, you know, there's different farms up and down the sound. So everybody does things a little differently. Everybody has a different opinion on eelgrass restoration too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, you know, where we find it, we're kind of cohabiting the same area, you know, without really any degradation around us. Like you end up with different sides of the fence, which is not a bad thing. I think it's good to hear from different perspectives. I don't think hearing one side of it, you know, is just reinforcing one side. So I think if there's data, I think it'd behoove anybody to not be able to see it or hear it. If there's hard data on restoration techniques and, you know, usage, why wouldn't you want to see it? You know?
Yeah. So do you feel like the industry would feel alienated if, you know, Julie came and presented, you know, a summary of those other papers, and it was done just within the working group, you know, with you as sort of the face of industry, but not open, you know, as an open forum to all the other growers?
I mean, I don't mind being placed in that role. You know, I work a lot with other growers, so, you know, we all have the same kind of mentality when it comes to this. So
Mhm.
I don't think there's a conflict when it comes to that, but you know, but someone's going to have a different opinion than I might. But that's going to go across the board with anything that you do.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Thanks. I just wanted to get your perspective on that. Thanks.
Absolutely.
Tessa?
Yeah, I was going to say that my sense is that most of the industry members are busy and they probably will not have time to participate, but I think it would behoove us to not share information. I mean, it's not really controversial, and inviting them. And for that matter, I feel like there's a glaring omission of fishers as well, and deep. And I know that they're not members of this committee, but at least inviting them and sharing this information, whether it's inviting them to the table or sharing the information and just asking for comments in a separate opportunity, may just, I think it would help rather than getting to the end point and then you get one person who has, you know, sort of a bee in their bonnet about it, and then we're back to square one.
So I'd just like to be cognizant that we only have about 2 minutes left here. Of course, if you need to leave at noon, please do so. I do want to, Bill, I'm going to interrupt for just a moment. I feel like this is a really important conversation, and perhaps we should table Julie's presentation until our meeting after next, and we pick up this idea during our next meeting. What do you guys think about that? I feel like we need a little more digging into this idea of if we are doing something that appears to be an informational hearing, even if we're not thinking of it that way, that we probably need a little more discussion and thought before we open this up to external people.
I just had a quick clarifying thing on that. So
Go right
you
ahead.
mentioned early on, can we invite more people? I know, Brad, you were a little concerned about numbers, but to Tessa's comment, for the next meeting, would we be able to add like a trawler or something?
Yeah, no, you really should not do that because
Okay.
the legislation sets forth, how the members have been selected by the chairs and rankings of the Environment Committee. So the membership itself is essentially set as it is. That said, again, if there are voices that you feel you need to hear from, that might be appropriate for an informational hearing down the road a little bit.
Yeah, I think we have to, right? But, Dave Carey is here, but it seems like we're missing on the working group, 2 legs of the 3-legged regulatory stool. And, we don't have a deep member and we don't formally have a core member.
Yeah.
So Jamie, do you want to maybe switch to what was the next meeting? Was that policy?
So I think our next meeting, what we should do is still do a review of existing information, but also, continue this discussion of how we move forward, how we engage with people outside, or I shouldn't say engage, how we are going to incorporate information and viewpoints from people that are not at this committee. So I think that's a good topic of discussion for next time. I suggest we start there. So that we leave enough time for it, and then also do just a review of existing information. I think what I'll ask everyone to do, rather than signing on to cover a specific topic, Lucas has shared some resources. I will share out some additional resources. And if we all have a chance to take a look at some of those existing resources, that would be great. If you are someone who is willing to step forward and present some of that information at our next meeting in like a 5 or 10 minute presentation, I'll also be asking for that. So I'm going to do this in a follow-up email, just as we're running out of time here, rather than trying to get consensus in the group. But I would like to talk about very quickly, how often do we want to meet? One suggestion, I forget if it was from Brad or Lucas or someone else, was these committees often meet every 2 weeks. Does that sound reasonable? Do we think 2 hours is a good amount of meeting time? And if those both sound good, what I'll do is I'll send out a poll to try and find a day that works best for everyone. So what do we think? Does every 2 weeks sound reasonable, thinking about that February deadline that's approaching? Or is that too often to fit into your schedule? I'm hearing no one saying.
So those are
"No, I
two
can't
separate
do it."
questions, Jamie.
Yeah, I know. They are. Yes.
I mean, from my perspective, it seems like we have to meet with that frequency, at least until we have a plan for a plan.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So at this point in time, I'll send out a poll to see what day and time works best for everyone. In general, is everyone constrained to days? Just confirming. Not seeing anyone say, yes, I am constrained to days. So I might.
Mark about like the work day. You like
Yeah.
early or late or middle?
If we did these at 4 a.m, that'd be perfect, but I get it. No, I mean, we can make this work whenever. I mean, we're pretty busy during the day. Like just to take a couple hours today was kind of a lot with a lot going on. But I mean, evenings are great for us. So whatever works for everybody too.
Dr. Vajri, just to advocate, there is a member that's not here, Griffin Harris. He's a member of the Marine Science program. He's in high school, so most of his weekdays are occupied until 2:30 in the afternoon. So going forward, I would, ask if we could keep that in mind too.
Yep, that's great. Is there anyone who is like, no, I absolutely cannot do evenings? Okay, I will put that in the poll as an option. We'll probably be looking at that late afternoon, early evening time period in the poll that comes out. All right, with that, I think we will conclude for the day. Thank you all, and you'll be hearing from me and probably from Lucas very soon.
All right, thank you, Jamie.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Bye all.
And then Dr. Vajri, I just wanted to say that in the event that you all wanted to come in, you, Bill, Lucy, Tessa, if it's any easier, we have a conference room here in advance. I can always reserve a room if you want to add an in-person component. There's always the option for us to be able to stream them online and allow you all to also be in a room together if that's any easier. So please definitely let me know.
Yep, that's great. And I will mention we have the same capacity here in Southeastern Connecticut at UConn. Looking at the committee members, it looked like a lot were in Southeastern Connecticut. I think David may be further away, but a lot of the folks, the aquaculture folks seem to be local.